everybody. Welcome to this last clinical grand round for the year before we break for the winter vacations. This grand round is being presented by the Department of Neurology. But as you'll go along the presentation, you'll realize there are many other departments who are involved in the process. And I'll be talking about establishing stroke services at AIIMS Jodhpur, the journey so far. So this presentation will be split into three parts. The first part, in which I'll briefly touch upon the various recognition of the various symptomatology of stroke, especially so when we are looking for saving brain and time is essential. The second part will be looking at some of the interesting cases that we have had through these 4 years of neurology services at AIIMS Jodhpur. And lastly, a little wrap on what we have actually achieved in the form of our statistics at the department. So what is stroke? So essentially it is an acute insult in which there is acute neuronal damage leading to neurological deficits, which occurs because of some issue with the blood flow to or from the brain. So essentially, if you are to use a short phrase, stroke is a brain attack. Just like everyone knows about heart attack, this is a brain attack. And the important essence of understanding, recognizing stroke is to realize that time is brain and time is life. So why it is so important is because everyone, the layman, including even many of us, amongst us doctors, we all know that there is a concept of heart attack. We have to rush the patient to the hospital as soon as the patient complains of chest discomfort or chest pain or any kind of abnormal palpitations or pounding in the chest. Whereas many of the symptoms of stroke get missed not only by the lay population, even amongst many of us, where we think that maybe because of other reasons, more peripheral reasons rather than central reasons, and we lose precious time in bringing the patient to the hospital. Sometimes the delay is in days. So the understanding and taking this message to the population is what is important. And therefore, we should understand that the problem of stroke is huge. Stroke is the leading cause of disability worldwide and the second leading cause of death. And disproportionately, it is seen to be more in the low and the middle income population countries, in which approximately 70% of strokes occur. In India itself, there has been a 17.5% increase in the number of stroke cases over the last 2 decades. And in the last, almost per year, 80 lakh strokes occur, of which it is an astounding number if we were to say that quarter of it occur in young. So the most productive, in the most productive age group, leading to significant disability and even stroke-related mortality. So the World Stroke Day, which is celebrated on October 29th, and this year it focused on the Precious Time campaign, that is, time saves life. And the aim was to raise awareness about stroke symptoms and the benefits of acting fast. Now, what is FAST? I will tell subsequently. But this is an acronym which, at least if everyone understands and is able to follow, we would be saving lots of patients in from the debilitating deficits that they have when they are missed. So the idea is to be the hero and to save a life by knowing the signs of stroke and following the 3 R's. So what are these 3 R's? Reduce the risk of stroke, recognize symptoms of stroke, and respond, so call the ambulance. So very briefly, there are 2 types of circulations, the arterial and the venous circulation, in which strokes can occur. And focusing on the arterial circulation, they can be ischemic, in which there is a clot which occludes the blood vessel which is supplying blood to the brain, and an area of the brain gets infarcted. And the other is the hemorrhagic stroke, in which a vessel, because of various reasons, may burst, and there is an accumulation of a blood inside the brain. So that there are various causes of stroke: ischemic, venous, hemorrhagic, and venous. So the most important when you're talking of adult strokes, which I'm talking about, is atherosclerosis. And apart from that, especially in young, we should look at carotid vertebral dissections, inflammatory disease of the vessel walls, moya disease, small vessel lipohydrosis, and cardioembolic stroke. Whereas for the causes for hemorrhagic stroke, the most important is hypertension. So uncontrolled hypertension may lead to bleeds in the brain. Apart from that, there can be intracranial vascular malformations, AVMs, angiomas, amyloid angiopathy, trauma, bleeding disorders, and illicit drug use. And venous strokes are seen in a certain segment of population, like in the postpartum period, anemic people, people who are exposed to high temperatures and are dehydrated, those who have pre-existing procoagulant states like hyperhomocystinemia, antiphospholipid syndrome, and other procoagulant states like antithrombin 3 deficiency, etc. So what is the meaning of acting fast? So FAST basically is an acronym which stands for F for face, A for arm, S for speech, and T for time. So first is F. F means if there is any symptom of sudden onset of drooping of any side of the face, or there is the angle of the mouth may droop, or there is a facial asymmetry when the patient is, the person is talking or smiling. The other is A for arm drift. So if there is a weakness, it can be a weakness in the just the grip, it can be a weakness of the entire limb. So we are focusing on the arm because this fatiobrachial is the most common, but there can be also isolated weakness of the leg. Then speech. So S for speech, so slurring of speech. There may be slurring of speech, there may be incomprehensible speech, unusually a sudden change of speech to something which is completely different, or a person is not able to understand what you are trying to speak. And once you are able to pick up these signs, T is for time. That is, time is crucial. So this was by the World Stroke Association. So the call number is 911, whereas it is going to be different in India. So time is a sense. So call the ambulance and take your patient immediately when these symptoms are there. So apart from that, there can be other symptoms of stroke. So there is sudden numbness or weakness of the face, arms, legs, especially on one side of the body. Sudden confusion, trouble speaking or understanding. Sudden trouble in seeing from one of the eyes or both of the eyes. Trouble in walking, balance, dizziness, and coordination. Or a sudden bad headache which has never been there before. So whenever such a patient comes to the emergency, the stroke team, especially the neurologist or the medicine resident who is there in the ER, has to do a quick evaluation in the ER itself. Now, if you were to look at neurological examination as such, it is very detailed. It goes on for at least half an hour to 1 hour if you have to see for everything. But this is a screening kind of a scale in which there are 11 items. Initially, when you look at the scale and we ask our residents to do, they find it very daunting. But there are these easy calculators which are available online, and you can quickly put in whatever your evaluation findings are as you go along, and it will be calculating simultaneously. And usually the end point is that you should be able to do an NIH's stroke scale within 5 minutes. So then it helps in categorizing. So the total is 42. Anything which is more than, say, 24 is considered to be a very severe kind of a stroke, and less than 1 is like almost normal. 1 to 4 is going to be considered as a mild stroke. So once you have decided that this patient has had a stroke, there are certain investigations which need to be done almost immediately, and that is the CT scan. So the CT scan helps in assessing whether there is infarct or the CT may be even normal if the patient comes in early. But if there's clinical symptoms of stroke and you are convinced that it is not a seizure or it is not psychogenic, then you can go ahead and do whatever is the next line of treatment. Or they can be established infarct, as is seen in this case. But the main role of doing a CT scan in an acute stroke is to rule out bleeds, because this is a situation in which the further treatment of ischemic stroke, which I'll talk about, is not going to be appropriate. And then there are situations when we are stuck and we wonder that the patient's symptoms, are they really stroke? So in that situation, the MRI comes to our to help us. So in this case, the patient has come with unsteadiness and dizziness, and the CT scan is normal. So we have taken the patient for a very short sequence MR, not the entire MR, in which we do two sequences, the diffusion weighted sequence and the flare sequence, and we look for a mismatch. So in the flare sequence, we are seeing nothing, but we are seeing this hyperintensity in the DWI in the right pica territory. So this indicates that there is an acute stroke which is less than 4.5 hours, and that is where we need to intervene. So we also do what is called a CT angiography as well as a CT perfusion scan in the acute stroke setting, and that helps in delineating what is the problem with the vessels. Like in this case, the MCA, that is the middle cerebral artery, is cut off. So there is a proximal cut off and there is no perfusion in the MCA territory. So this is again helps in defining what is going to be the next line of treatment. Apart from that, there are other ancillary tests which need to be mandatorily done, which include hemogram, blood sugar, the renal function, liver function test, lipid profile, and depending upon whether we are dealing with venous stroke, etc. So we have coagulation profile, and ECG and Holter is something that we do for the ischemic strokes. So how do we treat? Just like we have the golden hour for trauma, we have a golden window for stroke. And for this, what is this golden window? This is the period in which we can give agents which can be help in busting the clot. So this is basically, now we are dealing with ischemic stroke. Hemorrhagic strokes are something which does not require immediate intervention, in the sense that it does require immediate intervention, but nothing that we miss the window, unless of course there is significant mass effect and the patient needs to be taken for decompression. And there the neurosurgeons do come in, because there are various other causes of hemorrhagic stroke, subarachnoid hemorrhage, etc. So we are now focusing on ischemic stroke, and we're talking about the golden window. And actylize and tenecteplase, these that is RTPA, recombinant tissue plasminogen activator, and tenecteplase, these are two drugs which are being used for thrombolysis. And the importance is to understand that the idea is to reduce the door to needle time. So not only from the home to the hospital, from the entry to the ER to the injection of the thrombolytic agent. Because if we were to delay after the patient has come into the ER, there is again going to be a significant loss of brain function, because every minute we are losing almost 1.9 million cells. So we need to save it as early as possible. So it has been found that if the door to needle time is less than 60 minutes, the unadjusted mortality rate was 8.6% versus 10.4% in patients in which it was more than 60 minutes. So there are various guidelines, there are various indications and contraindications for giving RTPA, and this window that we are talking about was initially 3 hours, and subsequently, however, the AHE and the ASA have, subsequent to various trials, have extended this window from 3 hours to 4.5 hours. There are certain exclusion criteria, but some of the exclusion criteria are also relative. Like the first one that I have written, patient older than 80 years. So to to bring to light, we have at least 5 to 6 patients who have been more than 80 years, in fact 85, and very recently a 95-year-old gentleman who underwent thrombolysis at our department. So there is no absolute contraindication with respect to age. So if there is no other contraindications, you can clearly go ahead with the thrombolysis if the patient is bound to benefit. So this is about the intravenous thrombolysis. Previously, intraarterial thrombolysis was also being done, but with the advent and the push that mechanical thrombectomy has got, IV thrombolysis is usually either followed, or independently even mechanical thrombectomy can be done in stroke. So what is mechanical thrombectomy? In this, there is an endovascular clot retrieval, and that helps so you're completely removing, sucking out the clot, or getting it into a mesh and taking it out, and that leads to a rapid flow restoration with decreased incidence of clot fragmentation. So where do we use it? We can use it in those patients in which even post RTPA the stroke is progressing, or there is no response, or whether there is a very large area at risk that we see in CT perfusion, or patients who have come outside the window, so beyond 4.5 hours, and they are ineligible, or they have contraindications and they are ineligible for IV RTPA. The other thing is about extending the window, and that is where again the mechanical thrombectomy comes in. So when we used certain other imaging techniques like DWI and CT perfusion, we are able to see the at-risk area of the brain. So the recent trials, that is the DAWN and the DIFFUSE 3, were clearly able to demonstrate the benefit that the patient could have even beyond 6 hours and up to 24 hours from last well seen. This is more so for wake-up strokes, when we don't know exactly when the stroke onset has occurred, like during the period of the sleep. So in these situations, these particular imaging studies helps in defining the period in which, defining whether this patient would be a good candidate still for a revascularization procedure. And this has actually changed the paradigm for acute stroke care worldwide. Other basic tenets of stroke treatment. For ischemic stroke, we have the antiplatelet drugs, which is aspirin and clopidogrel. If there are cardioembolic cause for stroke, we are starting anticoagulation. We have to look at control of heart rhythm and heart rate, like if the patient has AF. Then we have to give medications, because as after this infarction, there is going to be brain edema, there is going to be significant mass effect, and there may be chance of the patient herniating and even are losing the patient. So in these situations, we need to reduce the intracranial pressure with either medications or even surgical decompression. And apart from that, we have blood pressure, which has to be maintained within certain strict limits which are there as per the guidelines, and cholesterol lowering drugs. For hemorrhagic stroke, the acute control of the blood pressure, again decongestants to decrease the pressure in the brain, and the surgical decompression as and when it is indicated. For venous stroke, rehydration, anticoagulation, anti-seizure medications if the patient has seizures, and surgical decompression if there is mass effect. So attention needs also to be given to the ABC, fever prevention of aspiration, checking and correcting the blood sugar, bed sores, and preventing DVT. So once you have stroke, what does it do? It definitely damages some part of your brain, and it may have, if you are able to completely reverse it by bringing the patient in the golden window, and you're able to do a revascularization procedure, so you might escape the bad effects of a stroke. However, there may be various types of other permanent disabilities which can happen, which can be in the form of language disability, visual disability, cognitive decline, etc. And so these are the various post-stroke effects. So somebody who is untreated or is non-compliant with medication may have even recurrent strokes, and then may end up with dementia. They may have seizures, and they may have loss of bladder control. So So once you have had the stroke and the patient then comes down from the ICU, we have the post-stroke rehabilitation, where the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation has to come in full force with physical rehabilitation, speech rehabilitation, cognitive rehabilitation. We need to do the step-down care in the wards, where the tracheostomy needs to be taken care of. Feeding has to be taken care of. So a water swallowing test is a very important test which can be done bedside to be able to see whether this patient is at risk of aspiration if we start oral feeds. Otherwise, a Ryle's tube is put in place. And then the nursing care. And modification of risk factors is something that has to be done long term. So the lifestyle risk factors like diet, nutrition, physical activity, tobacco use and smoking to be stopped, and alcohol use to be stopped. And medical risk factors like high blood pressure, AF, to be controlled, high cholesterol level to be controlled, circulation problems and diabetes to be controlled. So of course nothing can be done about non-modifiable risk factors, but still there is, if we know that we are at risk, then we can do the primary prevention. So just briefly about the stroke care, as I have told you, so now that you have an idea what is going on. So this is the chain of stroke care at AIIMS, and this is what was started way back in 2018, I think. And this is our stroke WhatsApp group, and you can see that there are about 85 participants in that. And these are people who are involved immediately when the patient is coming in, wheeled into the ER. So you can see that this is the emergency record of the resident. And as soon as this is put on the WhatsApp group, the neurology resident rushes. The patient is shifted to the, there is an initial assessment which is done in the ER, and the patient is rushed to the CT, which is about 50 meters away, and the CT is done and the CT is interpreted. So we have CT, plain CT head, and that rules out the bleed, and then we have a CT perfusion. And after that, the message is put back onto the group that this is what we have. What do we do next? So the faculty and the resident then starts coordinating in the respective departments, especially the neurology and the radio diagnosis. And we go to the next level, that is to decide whether the patient has to undergo thrombolysis. So starting thrombolysis can now occur both in the CT room as well as in the ER. So once thrombolysis has been done, if the patient is continuously observed in the ER, and the next decision has to be taken whether the patient is recovering, whether the patient is a candidate for the next level of treatment, that is mechanical thrombectomy. So we call in our partners, that is the diagnostic and interventional radiology faculty, and then they come in and they put in these various devices and they try to achieve a good flow subsequent to the procedure. So once all this is done, the patient comes back to neurology, either to the Neuro-ICU or in the AICU, where continuous monitoring is done for looking for deterioration as well as providing ventilation and other supportive measures for the patient. And continuous observation means almost hourly monitoring of the patient and looking for if there is any signs of mass effect for which neurosurgical intervention can be done, like decompressive craniectomy. Next comes the nursing care. So we have the DVT pump, the Ryle's tube in place, the central line in place. So you may say that this is happening for most patients, but this is something that we need to do to be able to get the maximum benefit of the thrombolysis or whatever procedure we have done, because if we can lose the patient at this level itself. And then we have our PMR people who come in and teach the staff about how to do chest and limb physiotherapy. So then we have other special investigations like transcranial Doppler, which has been recently added to our armamentarium. And then once the patient is out of the ICU, we have step-down care, in which again the patient is reassessed when the patient comes down to the ward, and the rehabilitation is further initiated with the hope of mobilizing and seeing the patient walk back home. So we come to the second part and a few cases, very interesting cases that we have seen. The first is of a 55-year-old gentleman, hypertensive, who had presented with COVID and was in home isolation. And 10 days subsequently, he developed sudden onset weakness of the left side of the body. And here we see a floating thrombus in the neck vessels. So this patient was treated with anticoagulation and he has also recovered and comes back on follow-up. Now this was, next patient is a 28-year-old gentleman who had COVID 2 months prior to presentation, and now he presented with 2 episodes of TIA-like phenomenon in which there was slurring of speech and weakness which had recovered. So there was, on MRI, there was nothing much. Even the diffusion was negative, but when we did the MR angiogram, we saw that there is a significant narrowing of the left supraclinoid ICA. So then with discussion with our radiologist, we did a vessel wall imaging, and that is where, this is what Sarvesh interestingly showed, was the thickening of the wall of the supraclinoid ICA. And this is suggestive of a focal cerebral arteriopathy of the inflammatory type, in which we gave steroids for a short course and the patient recovered. Another similar case, but this was post-COVID vaccination, and about 7 days after the vaccination, this 30-year-old gentleman presented with grip weakness and facial weakness, and he had just, as I said, grip weakness. So that is something that can be easily again missed. And this was a small infarct sitting in the hand knob area of the left motor cortex. And again, we had this enhancement in the vessel which was supplying this. Again another case of focal cerebral arteriopathy of the inflammatory type, of which various reports have been also there. Now the next patient is a 58-year-old gentleman who presented with right upper and lower limb weakness for 10 minutes, and when he came, his power was 0/5. He was a known case of dilated cardiomyopathy, and he had also had a stroke 3 years ago, for which he had undergone mechanical thrombectomy here itself. And this is what was there. So there was a very small infarct in the right basal ganglia because of the previous event. But essentially for this stroke, the aspect score that we see on CT was 10 on 10, so there was no obvious infarct. But when we did the CT angio, we could see that there is a cutoff of the left M1 segment of the MCA. And this is what was helped the cerebral blood flow and the cerebral perfusion. So the perfusion showed a significant deficit. And so in this case, though the patient underwent thrombolysis, subsequently, because there was such a large infarct zone at risk in the perfusion scan, thrombectomy was attempted, and this is what we can see, that there is an abrupt cutoff here and there is hardly any filling in the left MCA. And then our colleagues have put in the stent retriever and the aspiration catheter, and this is what they have aspirated, and this is the subsequent recanalization of the entire middle cerebral artery territory. Now, this is a case of a 45-year-old gentleman who had left hemiparesis with headache, nausea, vomiting for 2 days, followed by altered sensorium. So his GCS was E1, V1, and 3, and he had a dilated pupil on the right side with sluggish motor response. And sluggish response to light, and the CT showed basically a cerebral venous thrombosis or hemorrhagic infarct with significant mass effect, and this is what the CT veno showed. So there is a filling defect in the superior sagittal sinus. This patient, since he was already showing signs of mass effect, immediately was referred to the neurosurgery department, and they did a decompressive craniectomy. The patient has been subsequently discharged and he's doing well. So this was a this is the second last, but this is a very interesting patient and a very challenging patient also. So 69-year-old gentleman who had multiple risk factors, diabetic, hypertensive, peripheral arterial disease, presented with slurring of speech, left hemiparesis and deviation of angle of mouth for about 3 hours. So he had an NIHS of 14, so a moderate intensity stroke. And the CT did not show anything, so it was an aspect 10 on 10. When we did the CT angiography, we saw that there is hardly any opacification of the right middle cerebral artery. And at this point of time, the thrombolysis was started. So again, we are seeing nothing here, the complete occlusion of the ICA. So again, a CT perfusion was done, and we are able to see that there is a significant large salvageable penumbra which is seen, and this was the stage at which we decided that we need to go ahead and do thrombectomy, because this was a large vessel occlusion and the patient would probably benefit. But what happened during the mechanical thrombectomy is, this is the initial images in which we are seeing that there is no filling of the right ICA. But then they went ahead and they put in their aspiration catheter. So this is what they found, that they were able to recanalize, but the recanalization was temporary, and there was the stenotic segment kept closing even after repeated angioplasty. So that is when I got a call that we want to go ahead and do a stenting. But the problem was that the patient has already received thrombolysis. Usually antiplatelet agents are not given in the first 24 hours because of high risk of producing bleed. So then we had to take, and once the stent is in place, we have to mandatorily start antiplatelet drugs. So it was a kind of, the patient's relative also consented, and we took the risk and we started injectable tirofiban, and we went ahead subsequently and shifted the next day to antiplatelet agents, and the patient has done well, so that we didn't have any significant bleed at all. So everything is not hunky-dory in stroke, and we can have such bad patients also, where the images are really bad, in which we have all kinds of bleeds with fluid levels, bleed all over in the subarachnoid space, and large capsuloganglionic bleed. These were all in COVID patients, and they didn't do well. So the last part, and I'll quickly go over it in 5 minutes, that is the stroke statistics at AIIMS Jodhpur. And as you can see that we have had a progressive increase in the load of stroke patients. Now all these numbers reflect the inpatient numbers, those who have been admitted, but we would probably be seeing almost equal, or if not more, in the ER who are not being admitted, or in the OPDs who are being seen in the OPDs and dealt with in the OPDs and evaluated there itself. So you can see that we did start in 2017, it was towards the end that we started inpatients, but subsequently we have had almost a doubling every year. And COVID no bar, we had actually a large number of strokes during COVID itself. And if we were to see the graph, you can see that there is almost an exponential increase in the number of strokes, especially the ischemic strokes. During the COVID pandemic, that is from March till December 20th, all these statistics is December 20th, 2021, we have had 487 strokes of all types, but the total number of strokes which could be directly related to COVID, in the sense that they were COVID PCR positive, were 21 in 2020 and 28 in 2021. But this is an understatement, because these, as I said, they were PCR positive. We had lots of strokes who had all the other symptomatology of COVID. They were PCR negative, or they were post-COVID, or they had very high inflammatory markers. So they were all suspicious. They had various characteristics of COVID strokes. And but they don't come in this count. So if we were to just look at them, this is about 10% of all the strokes that we have seen during the period of the COVID pandemic. And if we were to see the COVID stroke-related deaths, then in 2020, 25% of these we lost, but it was much higher, the death rate, in the 2021, that is the second surge. So we had almost 50% mortality amongst the patients who had COVID-related strokes. And there were certain characteristics of stroke that we saw during COVID. That is, we had more of large vessel occlusions. We had floating thrombi in one or more vessels, including the limbs, in the aorta, in the subclavian vessels. We had associated pulmonary thromboembolism, suggesting a procoagulant kind of a state, and very fast progression of the ischemic strokes. So there have been also, the revascularization procedures that we have done have also gone up exponentially. So we started with 1 and 3 in 2017 and 2018, and now we are doing almost around 50 to 60 procedures of thrombolysis alone. So including mechanical thrombectomy, in combination with thrombolysis, we have total of around 167 which have been done in the past 4 years. Looking at only endovascular therapy for stroke, which is done by the Department of Diagnostic and Interventional Radiology, we have 35 mechanical thrombectomy done, 20 carotid stentings, and 5 stentings for intracranial atherosclerotic disease. Stroke decompression has also had an exponential rise. As you can see that we have significantly increased numbers in 2021, in which we have 36 total stroke decompressions, and this percentage has gone up more for the ischemic strokes. Hemorrhagic strokes and venous strokes are also there. So we have had lots of students who have also been doing some kind of a research. We have 2 DM theses, one completed, one going on the water swallowing test and the transcranial Doppler studies. We have our MD thesis, which are going on in the Department of Diagnostic and Interventional Radiology, and some of which have been completed. Then we have again theses which are going on under the Department of Internal Medicine and Department of Anesthesia. We also had a nursing research, MSc nursing research project, and the paper has also been accepted for publication. And another research project on from an MPH research project, which has also been accepted for publication. So these are some of the publications. We were also involved in the setting down of a book on management of post-COVID neurological sequelae, in which stroke also figured. And we have 2 major projects. One is the hospital-based stroke registry, where by the NCDIR Bengaluru. And these are all multidisciplinary projects. So we have team including radiology, neurosurgery, and internal medicine. And another project which we are just going to be starting, that is the impetus, which actually looks for implementation of the evaluation and the treatment package for uniform stroke care, so to try to further reduce the door to needle time and the post-stroke care. So again, we have multidisciplinary co-investigators from all these departments. And as I said, it is a team effort. So it is actually a team of teams. And this is my team from neurology. All the teams would have some team members who are missing, so please do not mind it. This is from emergency medicine and internal medicine. Our team from diagnostic and interventional neuroradiology, all happy faces without masks, some of them with masks, and some of them are really serious from neurosurgery, though they generally are not such serious people. From anesthesia and from physical medicine and rehabilitation, and of course we can't forget the nursing staff from the ICUs. And of course, many others, and my special thanks to the Department of Cardiology, Biochemistry, Pathology, and Microbiology, who have been there to take care of all the investigations which need to be done in our stroke patients. But nothing could be done without the mammoth backing of the institution, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, Jodhpur, and all the administration, which includes Professor M.K. Garg, the present medical superintendent, Professor Arvind Sinha, the past medical superintendent, and all others, and above all, our director and CEO, Professor Sanjeev Mishra, for whom I have special thanks, because I have looked at him for support at all times, and he has been a visionary who has had faith in what we were doing and has supported us not only in getting high-end equipment, in establishing a CT scanner which is right next to the emergency, so that the patient takes hardly a minute to be wheeled in from the ER to the CT scan, which helps both for trauma as well as for strokes. For the establishment of the Neuro-ICU, and probably above all, for making thrombolysis free, which is something which was highly desirable, especially so that it puts all our patients, irrespective of their financial status, on an even treatment ground, I would say, in the sense that it is a very expensive drug. It would cost around 50,000 plus, and when we started our thrombolysis in 2017-18, we had to give the option to the patient whether they could afford that, and it is very difficult for a patient relative to decide when they are seeing the patient in such a condition whether they can afford 50,000, can they give it upfront and pay for it. So making it free was a big step towards being able to give thrombolysis to all these patients who are deserving, and to be able to intervene in that golden hour. So where do we go from here? We have been able to start various aspects of the stroke program and make AIIMS Jodhpur a hub for care for stroke. But we aim for more expertise, more experience, and expansion of our stroke project. So from the hub, we would want to develop the spokes, and we want to have our outreach program, which needs to be developed. A small step in that direction has been the signing of the memorandum with the FO station Jaisalmer, and there have been a few patients who have been flown in from there for treatment at AIIMS for stroke. We also dream to have a dedicated stroke unit, interventional facilities, again for all suitable candidates, and in that maybe some of the things are covered now by the Ayushman Bharat scheme. We also hope to become a hub for revascularization surgical procedures, and along with that go along with more of stroke research, stroke genomics, and dedicated neuro rehabilitation, including physical, speech, and cognitive therapy. Thank you all, and I'll be ready to take any questions.
Hello, Madam, that was a wonderful presentation, and I had a personal experience of stroke in one of my close relatives recently, and what I was thinking is, one thing is that recently when we discuss that health is to reach communities, but these are particular uses where the big buildings of hospital do matter a lot. The coordination of all the specialties, it culminates into saving lives and quality of life as well. So ma'am, few questions like how much important is aspirin? Because I saw personally also there's a risk of aspiration too much. Once the face and stroke starts, facial weakness is there. So if people skip aspirin, will it matter much in the society? One.
Skip aspirin or aspiration?
Aspirin. So everybody knows that the moment stroke or cardiac event is there, we should give aspirin. But the patient may aspirate. So how important is the role if somebody can be shipped within 1 or 2 hours to the hospital? Should we emphasize again and again on aspirin in the community?
So compared to a heart attack, where we would say that you quickly take an aspirin or a sorbitrate, stroke is different. As I said, that we need to be very sure that the stroke is not because of a bleed. So some people may say that we can clinically diagnose that this is not a bleed or it is an ischemic insult. But there are bleeds which are small and they can mimic an ischemic stroke. So the important thing is to recognize, so if you give aspirin, it is going to worsen the coagulation process and the bleed may increase in size. So therefore, it is important to recognize the stroke symptoms and bring the patient to the hospital, get the CT done. That is something that does not require a big tertiary care center. We have now got CTs at every nook and corner in most of the cities, towns. We have CT scanners. So at least a CT which is done immediately will be able to rule out a bleed. Once the bleed is ruled out, you give aspirin. Even if you're not able to get within the golden. And there are, even in Delhi, it takes so much time to travel. So probably the golden window goes away in the travel itself.
Madam, second question is, have you seen how bad it is if somebody gives RTPA and later in the higher center you recognize that it is actually a hemorrhagic stroke? How bad the condition becomes if somebody infuses RTPA in hemorrhagic?
You can lose the patient.
Okay.
So it can be really bad. You can have bleed all over the place. So that is why it is very essential not to do the treatment of stroke at home.
Mm-hmm.
The idea is again, get the ambulance, get the patient to the hospital.
Okay. Madam, one more question. What is there in PM? We know the importance of radiology to pick it whether it is ischemic or hemorrhagic. We understood about thrombolysis and thrombectomy. Now in PMR, what is there if missed does matters? For example, in a stroke, there is a golden hour. Now in rehab, what is there in PMR which if missed really significantly matters?
So let us start from day 1 of stroke. So PMR does not come in at day 5 of stroke. PMR has to come in from day 1 of stroke. So some part of it we start itself, as we said, first the prevention of fever, aspiration, sugar control, these are very important in the initial stages of stroke and can save lives. You may have done everything, you have done thrombolysis, you have done thrombectomy, but if your patient aspirates, goes onto the ventilator, develops SWAP, that is the end of the story. So you don't want your patient to deteriorate after you have done everything. So you have already spent 3 lakhs, suppose not in our hospital, but outside in the peripheral center, and at the end of the story you lose the patient. So that is what you don't want. So the PMR means looking whether the patient is at risk for aspiration, treating if he has developed an aspiration, treating it by good physiotherapy, starting the limb therapy immediately so that the patient does not develop significant spasticity. The spasticity comes in, and if the patient goes to the PMR late, again he has already become spastic, then we have to think of devices like Botox and other things that we need to give to reduce the spasticity. But before that, if we start doing exercises, and there are various, I think they are the better people to answer what kinds of rehabilitation are available, including gait training. So all this is going to help in the long run.
Madam, last question, sorry. There is, if there is an intermediate center and there is a higher center, somebody gets some stroke in an intermediate level center like district hospital, where they are able to do a CT, and they can also start thrombolysis for a ischemic stroke. So now I read about it, there is drip and ship and mothership, 2 models. Like if there's a huge large vessel stroke, you can start the drip of thrombolysis and the patient can reach the hospital where thrombectomy may also be needed. It was not available at a smaller center. So what is this like clarity about? I will ask, the question is to Sarvesh and you both. Do you see any risk if thrombolysis has been started and then you realize that thrombectomy is required, or no?
So the idea, when to the last slide I said, to have a hub and a spoke. So hub and a spoke is not for, is not just for the post-stroke patients, say for post-stroke rehab or for post-stroke assessment of risk factors. We are also talking about the stroke, the hub and the spoke model for the development of thrombolysis at peripheral centers. So we can have, there are already AI algorithms which can, suppose you feed your CT data into it, they'll be able to tell you that this is hemorrhagic. So somebody who is not a neurologist, somebody who is just a physician and he has also not been so much trained, at least the CT data, if it gets fed into it, it will say that this is not a bleed, this is an infarct, this has got mass effect or something like that. And further algorithms are being developed for even CT angio, CT perfusion, if those centers can do that, but usually they are not able to do that in peripheral centers. So the idea is, suppose they are able to, or even without all these AI, suppose I am the hub and you are the spoke, you get the CT done and you send a WhatsApp image to me. I say, ki, bhaiya, this is an infarct, please go ahead, or the CT is normal, I quickly ask you what is the symptoms of the patient. It looks like stroke, I'll say go ahead with thrombolysis. So that is how even small centers like in Mandi and HP, they have started thrombolysis in peripheral centers. And then if you have a tertiary care hospital where you can send, you continue. So that is what we do. In the CT room itself we are starting. You can start thrombolysis anywhere. Only the monitoring has to go on, and subsequently, if required, thrombectomy can be done at the next center.
Thank you.
Wonderful, Dr. Samhita, and you are doing the wonderful job. As a future part of the stroke development and stroke unit, have you ever asked or thought of providing the helicopter services to the nearby district centers like Jaisalmer, Badmer, Pali, Siroi, where it is just 10-15 minutes, and as Dr. Puneet was pointing out that okay, you have the CT, you are not able to see, and if you have this such a service of call the disability this phone services, emergency services, and they just quickly tell, and of course patient may feign the stroke to ride in the helicopter. It is a different things, but definitely at the AIIMS, why not think of those and start thinking of those terms?
So the concept of having a helipad in the hospital is there in the West, and many patients, not only stroke, trauma patients are shifted. So there are big centers who have the patients getting shifted. Well, I will leave it up to the administration to decide where we want to have the helipad at AIIMS Jodhpur. But Jaisalmer, as I said, Air Force Station, they have helicopters at their disposal, and many of their stroke patients which have been referred in the window have come in the helicopter only within 15 minutes to half an hour. They have landed at the Jodhpur airport and they have been brought to RER. So that is the temporary solution.
Helipad been planned initially for all the AIIMS, including Jodhpur. But we must realize where we are. We are in a very strong Army and Air Force area. So there are a lot of administrative and other issues which need to be resolved if this is going to be. And you need space and land where a helicopter can land and be safe. So yes, it's there. It's not a cross in front of it. It's going to be a tick. And I think future we should be able to get it. We should get a solution of having more land, etc., and further expansion. That's for sure.
That has to be somewhere in the future, the way forward, as we're getting more and more crowded, probably.
Very nice presentation, ma'am, and congratulations to you and the whole team. Ma'am, my question is that because stroke is such a clinical syndrome where atherosclerosis and hypertension are two things that are very closely related, and chronic kidney disease is one of the clinical condition where we can find both of these. Do we have data, because in CKD as the GFR decreases, the risk or the incidence of hypertension is also increased. So do we have the data that shows how is the prevalence of stroke in CKD patient, or how many of these stroke patients have underlying CKD?
I have not specifically looked into this for our data, but what you're saying is right, because they are common risk factors. And many of our stroke patients have underlying CKD, or as you said, there are many drugs that we give during stroke treatment which can further precipitate the critically balanced renal situation. So it is important, and especially in hemorrhagic stroke, when we are routinely trying to do renal Dopplers, renal artery Dopplers, to see if there is any renal artery stenosis which may be there. So we can look into it separately. If you are interested, then we'll definitely look into it.
Thank you.
Most of the things have been done about treatment and it has advanced to a lot. Only non-invasive thrombolysis like ultrasonic are being worked upon, and I hope that they will come in coming decade. Only thing where we are lacking in our country and also in our center is prevention. Lifestyle disease can prevent it. Unnecessary advancements in the treatment side, perhaps great disparity in preventive side, which is the true story. Matches all the patients. 30% of patients have also carotid stenosis, coronary stenosis. So all these patients have comorbidities. So we need to change our lifestyle. Who will do it? I don't know how to initiate it. Psychologist, sociologist, or PSM. I don't know.
It was a very nice presentation, ma'am.
Thank you, Sarvesh.
And just to answer Sir's question regarding drip and ship and mothership, the problem is in our country it is difficult to get directly mothership. Like if somebody is coming from Barmer, 250 kilometers, they will be wasting a lot of time. It's ideal to have like a spoke and a hub model or a drip and a ship model where somewhere we can identify the stroke, start the IV TPA and then ship the patient if requires mechanical thrombectomy, or the patient might improve in the way also. So that is there. Large vessel occlusion invariably needs mechanical thrombectomy, but they are only 1/5 of the stroke burden. So most of the patients are going to benefit by IV TPA.
Thank you.